Hello St Nicholas class, I hope you're all very well and you're having a good week. Start again. Hello St Nicholas class, I hope you're all very well and you're having a good week. How did you get on with your personification? Remember, you can send me what you've done if you'd like to my email address, or you can send it to Miss Putlands. I know she loves to see what you guys have been up to. Today what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at Horsham and some images that you'll recognise of what Horsham looks like now. And we're going to look at what Horsham was like years and years ago and think about how it's changed and what looks different. And then we're going to start to read Roald Dahl's Boy, Tales of Childhood. Now, I know in year 2 we read quite a few Roald Dahl stories. I really enjoy them. But this one is all about when he grew up, and he talks about what life is like, and you can think about how it was different. So first of all, let's have a look at Horsham, which is our town, and have a look how it's changed across the years. So you will all probably recognise this image. It's a large shop in the centre of town, Wilko's. We walk past it all the time when we go to church. Okay, but if we look at an image, and this is what it used to look like years ago. So you can see there's a lot of difference. The building's very different. You used to be able to get cars up that street and used to be able to drive up the high street. The people look quite different. What they're wearing, their clothes are different. So Horsham through the years has changed a lot. Another photo you may recognise, so this is a part of Southwater, and this is the junction sort of in the main part of Southwater. And so you can see the roadside, you can see the cars driving down the street, you can see the pavements. And if we have a look at it, this is exactly the same spot, but this is in 1863, so a very long time ago. And you can see there's no pavements, a black tarmac on the road, there's no cars, but there are horse and carts. You can see the people dressed very differently. There's very little buildings, all this looks like trees and fields. So that whole area looked very different many years ago. Another image you should be familiar with is this is the Carfax in Horsham. So many of you probably walk through this quite often. You've got the bandstand, and you've got the shops on the right hand side, and you've got people walking around doing their shopping, lovely green trees, we've got the War Memorial. But if we go back to 1966, okay, we've still got the beautiful buildings, but once again, you used to be able to drive through the Carfax, there was a road going through it. People again are dressed quite differently to how we dress today. Okay, there's not the same shops that there used to be. We've got phone boxes. Okay, so it's changed a lot across the years. This image is Warnham Road, which some of you may know, some of you may even live close to. So now on Warnham Road, you've got a co-op on the right hand side. It's a big main road going through Horsham, lots of beautiful houses all the way down it. But many years ago, even though some of the buildings are still there and they're still the same, again, we've got no wide road, no pavements. The children again are dressed very differently. Girls have got bonnets on, boys have got caps on. And Horsham used to look very different. So we all know this road quite well. This is the Causeway. We actually walked down it when we were in year 2 together on 2 of our trips. So you've got the Causeway leading to St Mary's Church at the bottom. It's a beautiful street full of some of the oldest houses we have in Horsham. And again, if we look at it, so 1909. Again, the road's very different. Some of the buildings are still the same because the Causeway's full of beautiful old buildings and the church is still there. But no cars, we've got horse and carts, gentlemen wore caps. And again, it was very different. So another image of Horsham. This is Brighton Road in Horsham. And you've got the iron bridge where the train goes over. And you've got all the shops lining the street, cars coming down the road. Again, if we look at the same spot, but in 1911, again, we've still got all the buildings, but they look quite different, don't they? No cars on the road, but horse and carts and cyclists. Still got the bridge in the distance there. But again, Horsham looked very, very different. And then last one. So this is a picture of Crawley Road, which is in North Horsham. You've got the parade of shops. You've got the co-op and the pet shop. You've got the hairdressers. And it's a big main road that goes through the top of Horsham. But if we go back to the same spot, but many, many years ago, again, it looks really different. Some of the buildings are still there, some of the houses are still there, but we've got no wide road, no cars going down. We've got a cyclist, a man on his bike with his cap on, no pavements. So again, even though there's some similarities and some buildings that are still standing, Horsham looks really different to what we're used to it looking like today. So what I want us to think about is what it would have been like to grow up in Horsham if we grew up many, many years ago. So instead of being 7 and 8 years old now, what if you were 7 or 8 years old 80 years ago? Or 60 years ago. So what we're going to do now is we're going to read part of Roald Dahl's Boy. And this book is all about what his life was like as he grew up. And Roald Dahl, when he was your age, so when he was about 7 or 8 years old, it was around about 1926, 1927. So a very, very different time. So we're going to learn about a little bit about what his childhood was like. When I was 6 years old, I went to my first school. The school was a kindergarten run by 2 sisters, Mrs. Caulfield and Miss Tucker, and it was called Elm Tree House. It is astonishing how little one remembers about one's life before the age of 7 or 8. I can tell you all sorts of things that happened to me from 8 onwards, but only a very few before that. I went for a whole year to Elm Tree House, but I cannot even remember what my classroom looked like. Nor can I picture the faces of Mrs. Caulfield or Miss Tucker, although I am sure they were very sweet and smiling. I do have a blurred memory of sitting on the stairs and trying over and over again to tie my shoelaces. But that's all that comes back to me. On the other hand, I can remember very clearly the journeys I made to and from school because they were so tremendously exciting. Great excitement is probably the only thing that really interests a 6-year-old boy, and it sticks in my mind. In my case, the excitement entered around this new tricycle. I rode to school on it every day with my eldest sister riding on hers. No grown-ups came with us, and I can remember oh so vividly how the 2 of us used to go racing at enormous tricycle speed down the middle of the road, and then, most glorious of all, when we came to a corner, we would lean to one side and take it on 2 wheels. All of this, you must realise, was in the good old days, when the sight of a motor car on the street was an event, and it was quite safe for tiny children to go tricycling and whooping their way to and from school on the centre of the highway. So much then for my memories of kindergarten. 62 years ago. It's not much, but that's all there's left. When I was 7, my mother decided I should leave kindergarten and go to a proper boys' school. By good fortune, there existed a well-known prep school for boys about a mile from our house. It was called Lindaf Cathedral School, and it stood right under the shadows of Lindaf Cathedral. Like the cathedral, the school is still there today and flourishing. But here again, I can remember very little about the 2 years I attended the school, between the ages of 7 and 9. Only 2 moments remain clearly in my mind. The first lasted no more than 5 seconds, but I will never forget it. It was my first term, and I was walking home alone across the village green after school, when suddenly one of the senior year one of the senior 12-year-old boys had come riding full speed down the road on his bicycle about 20 yards away from me. The road was on the hill and the boy was going down the slope, and as he flashed by, he started backpedaling very quickly so that the freewheeling mechanism of the bike made a loud whirling sound, and at the same time he took his hands off the handlebars and folded them casually across his chest. I stopped dead and stared at him. How wonderful was this? How swift and brave and graceful in his long trousers with bicycle clips around them, and his scarlet school cap and a jaunty angle on his head. One day, I told myself, one glorious day, I will have a bike like that, and I will wear long trousers with bicycle clips, and my school cap will sit jaunty on my head, and I will go whizzing down the hill, pedalling backwards with no hands on the handlebars. I promise you that if somebody had caught me by the shoulder at that moment and said to me, "What is your greatest wish in life, little boy? What is your absolute ambition? To be a doctor, a fine musician, a painter, a writer, a Lord Chancellor?" I would have answered without hesitation that my only ambition, my hope, my longing was to have a bike like that, to go whizzing down the hill with no hands on the handlebars. It would be fabulous. It made me tremble just to think about it. My second and only other memory of Llandaff Cathedral School is extremely bizarre. It happened a little over a year later, when I was just 9. By then I'd made some friends, and when I walked into school in the mornings I would start out alone, but would pick up 4 other boys of my own age along the way. After school was over, the same 4 boys and I would set out together across the village green and through the village itself, heading for home. On the way to school and on the way back we always passed a sweet shop. No, we didn't. We never passed it. We always stopped. We lingered outside its rather small window, gazing in at the big glasses jars full of bullseyes and old-fashioned humbugs and strawberry bonbons and glacier mints and acid drops and pear drops and lemon drops and all the rest of them. Each of us received 6pence a week for pocket money. And whenever there was money in our pockets, we would all troop in together and buy a pennyworth of this or that. My favourites were sherbet suckers and licorice bootlaces. One of the other boys, whose name was Thwaites, told me I should never eat licorice bootlaces. Thwaites' father, who was a doctor, had said that they were made from rat's blood. The father had given his young son a lecture about licorice bootlaces when he had caught him eating one in bed. "Every rat catcher in the country," the father said, "takes his rats to the licorice bootlace factory, and the manager pays 2pence for each rat. Many a rat catcher has become a millionaire by selling his dead rats to the factory." "But how do they turn the rats into licorice?" the young Thwaites asked his father. "They wait until they've got 10,000 rats," the father answered. "Then they dump them all into a huge shiny steel cauldron and boil them up for several hours. 2 men stir the bubbling cauldron with long poles, and in the end they have a thick steaming rat stew. After that, a cruncher is lowered into the cauldron to crunch the bones, and what's left is a pulpy substance called rat mash." "Yes, but how do they turn it into licorice bootlaces, Daddy?" the young Thwaites had asked. According to Thwaites, he had caused his father to pause and think for a few moments before he answered it. At last he said, "The 2 men who are doing the stirring with the long poles now put on their Wellington boots and climb into a cauldron and shovel the hot rat mash onto a concrete floor. Then they run a steamroller over it several times to flatten it out. What is left looks rather like a gigantic black pancake. And all they have to do after that is to wait for it to cool down and harden so they can cut it up into strips and make bootlaces." "Don't ever eat them," his father said. "If you do, you'll get ratitis." "What's ratitis, Daddy?" asked Thwaites. "All the rats that the rat catchers catch are poisoned with rat poison," said the father. "Is it the rat poison that gives you ratitis?" "Yes, but what happens to you when you catch it?" "Your teeth become very sharp and pointed," the father had answered, "and a short stumpy tail grows out of your back, just above your bottom. There is no cure for ractitis. I ought to know, I'm a doctor. We all enjoyed Thwaites' stories, and we made him tell it to us many times on our walks to and from school. But it didn't stop any of us, except Thwaites, from buying licorice bootlaces. At 2 for a penny, they were the best value in the shop. A bootlace, in case you hadn't had the pleasure of having one, is not round. It's like a flat black tape, about ½ an inch wide. You buy it rolled up in a coil, and in those days it used to be so long that when you unrolled it and held it, one end at arm's length above your head, the other end touched the ground. Sherbet suckers were also 2 a penny. Each sucker consisted of a yellow cardboard tube filled with sherbet powder, and there was a hollow licorice straw sticking out of it. Rat's blood again, obviously, according to Thwaites. You sucked the sherbet up through the straw, and when it was finished, you ate the licorice. They were delicious. Those sherbet suckers, the sherbet fizzed in your mouth, and if you know how to do it, you could make the white froth come out of your nostrils and pretend you were throwing a fit. Gobstoppers, costing a penny each, were enormous, hard round balls the size of small tomatoes. One gobstopper would provide about an hour's worth of non-stop sucking, and if you took it out of your mouth and inspected it every 5 minutes or so, you would find it had changed colour. There was something fascinating about the way it went from pink to blue to green to yellow. We used to wonder how in the world the Gobstopper factory managed to achieve this magic. How does it happen? We would ask each other, how can they make it keep changing colour? It's your spit that does it, young Thwaites proclaimed. As the son of the doctor, he considered himself to be an authority on all things that had to do with the body. He could tell us about scabs and when they were ready to be picked off. He knew why the black eye was blue, why blood was red. It's your spit that makes a Gobstopper change colour, he kept insisting. When we asked him to elaborate on this theory, he answered, "You wouldn't understand it if I told you." Pear drops were exciting because they had a dangerous taste. They smelled of nail varnish and they froze the back of your throat. All of us were warned against eating them, and the result was that we ate them more than ever. Then there was hard brown lozenge called the tonsil tickler, and the tonsil tickler smelled very strongly of chloroform. We had not the slightest doubt that these things were saturated in the dreaded anaesthetic, which, as Thwaites had many times pointed out to us, could put you in a deep sleep for hours at a stretch. If my father has to saw off somebody's leg, he said, he pours chloroform on a pad and then the person sniffs it and goes to sleep, and my father saws his leg off without him even feeling it. But why do they put it on sweets to sell them to us? We asked. You might think a question like that would have baffled Thwaites, but no. Thwaites was never baffled. My father says tonsil tickers were invented for dangerous prisoners in jail, he said. They give them one with each meal and the chloroform makes them sleepy and stops them writing. Yes, we said, but why sell them to children? It's a plot, Thwaites said. A grown-up plot to keep us quiet. The sweet shop in Llandaff in the year of 1923 was at the very centre of our lives. To us, it was a bar is to the drunk, or a church is to the bishop. Without it, there would have been little to live for. But it had one terrible drawback. This sweet shop, the woman who owned it was a horror. We hated her, and we had good reason for doing so. Her name was Mrs. Pratchett. She was a small, skinny old hag with a moustache on her upper lip and a mouth as sour as green gooseberries. She never smiled. She never welcomed us when we went in. The only time she spoke were when she said things like, "I'm watching you, so you keep your thieving fingers off my chocolates," or "I don't want you in here, just look around. Either of you folks, go get out." But by far, the most loathsome thing about Mrs. Pratchett was the filth that clung around her. Her apron was grey and greasy. Her blouse had bits of breakfast all over it, toast crumbs and tea stains and splotches of dried egg yolk. It was her hands, however, that disturbed us most. They were disgusting. They were black with dirt and grime. They looked as though they had been putting lumps of coal on the fire all day. And do not forget, please, it was these very hands and fingers that she plunged into the sweet jars when we asked for our pennyworth of treacle toffees or wine guns or nut clusters or whatever. There were precious few health laws in those days, and nobody, least of all Mrs. Pratchett, ever thought of using a little shovel to get the sweets out. The mere sight of her grimy right hand with its black fingernails digging an ounce of chocolate fudge out of the jar would have caused a starving tramp to go running from the shop. But not us. Sweets were our life. We had to put up with far worse than that to get them. So we simply stood and watched in silence while this disgusting old woman stirred around inside the jars with her foul fingers. The other thing we hated about Mrs. Pratchett was her meanness. Unless you spent a whole sixpence all in one go, she wouldn't give you a bag. Instead, you got your sweets twisted up in a small piece of newspaper, which she tore off a pile of old Daily Mirrors lying on the counter. So you can well understand that we had it in for Mrs. Pratchett in a big way, but we didn't quite know what to do about it. Many schemes were put forward, but none of them was any good. None of them, that is, until suddenly, one memorable afternoon, we found the dead mouse. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for now. Your task this week, if you'd like to do it, is ask your grandparents, ask your parents, family, friends, ask them what it was like when they were your age, when they were 7 and 8 years old. How did they get to school? What was school like? Where did they live? Do they have any memories of being 7 and 8 years old? Okay, have a lovely rest of your week, and I will see you next time. Bye.